You talked earlier about research and the benefit for a university of research and vice versa. Do you think that, or how do you think all these issues apply differently to undergraduate study versus postgraduate or graduate study? And do you think that that's a division that could happen where, there's a new model of research-based graduate study that's not necessarily connected to an undergraduate university?
Could be, and that's a disturbing aspect of the picture that we haven't talked about at all. So, I didn't make the point explicitly, but it's true. I mean, Dumont University isn't doing any research on anything, right? So the fact is that the research that's being done here is actually being subsidized by the undergrads, and suppose that stops happening. Well, what would occur? I don't know. This actually relates to Jim's question, so it comes down in part to sort of what do we as a public really think about all of that. I haven't done anything quantitatively, but my sense is, and I may be just wrong about this, but my sense is that Europe has invested more in the sort of think tank model, right? Where you have the Fraunhofer Institutes and the Max Planck Institutes, and maybe that's the end of the list, I don't really know, but I sort of have the sense that in Europe there's this idea, well, we're going to have, it's societally worthwhile to have people sort of collected together doing that kind of stuff. And somebody might say, well, we have the federal labs, and actually as a share of GNP, those are comparable or whatever, but somehow it doesn't seem as if that's our view. We rely on it being the job of higher ed to kind of do that. And I'm not aware of there having been anything like any public dialogue or discussion over one of the facts that I mentioned, which is that the way overhead rates are set by the federal government systematically under-recovers overhead. Why should that be? So I don't know, but it is that way, right? So, would it be the case that if someone sort of said, well, look, this is messing up what's otherwise productive alliance, we're sort of draining resources from institutions that are being weakened by other forces, we shouldn't do that, we should actually pay people a premium, we should pay more in overhead than they actually spend. Again, I don't know if this is in any way realistic, but as far as I know, nobody's really raising the question, and so there is a worry. I mean, if the higher education system we have it now, if Jonathan Gruden is right, and institutions wholesale crater, then one of the things that's going to be left stranded is a huge share of our national R&D. I don't suppose people want that to happen, but again, I don't see anybody really thinking about it. It's kind of like, well, we've been doing this forever, and I guess it'll continue forever. And if Jonathan's right, it's not going to continue forever. Eric.
So at the Uncollege or any of these other places, real or virtual places where, sort of in your words, they have staff but no faculty, who's doing the grading? And should someone be doing the grading? Is that an important issue?
Yeah. That's a good question. So Tom has had to leave, but probably this is good news for Tom Landauer's company, because probably more of the grading would be done by LSA. And there would certainly be a pressure on, cheaper kinds of assessments. I'd ask us, in a large lower division biology course, who's doing the grading? A Mark Sense machine, right? The College of Boston can certainly afford a Mark Sense machine. So this is another case where, when you look into this, you find out that there are things we could be doing and maybe should be doing, but we aren't doing them. Okay. But anyway, yeah, it's a good question. Garrett.
So I actually wanted to say something very similar to Jim. I mean, your cost analysis, at least, is very different in Europe. And I happen, to live whatever, half my life in Europe, half my life here. And I don't want to say that the European system is ideal, otherwise I may not be here. But the cost analysis is very different. I think at the more basic level, in some ways, the question is also, how do societies value education? And you can read many articles that education will be really the element of the future. If you think about outsourcing and offshoring jobs. You can look at this angle to it, where it says, well, it's sort of, the challenge is to educate a society where people can act creatively and so on. And with respect to the lifelong learning aspect, I think, we named our center Lifelong Learning 15 years ago, in sort of trying to emphasize that this is an important aspect. A last comment, again of a very global nature, because this came up many times. For me, you emphasized, universities provide these credentials and they do tests and so on. If one brings this together and says, well, lifelong learning is really what we want to achieve, then what we should educate young people for is not necessarily to know a little bit more content here and there, but to fall in love with learning. If something like this is possible. To create a passion for learning. And to see a test not as the most important thing. But and again, the European system is very, very different with respect to tests. When I first came here, I was amazed. There were tests everywhere, whereas I went to universities there for several years without ever taking a test. And the complexities of where you can change something. So let's say we design a university where students go to develop a passion, a love for learning for the rest of their life. Would that be different? So I just wanted to say it's such a multifaceted topic that maybe the cost, while it is without a question important, is just one dimension of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that completely. And again, you could do some kind of crude rate analysis, right? So, what's the rate at which the number of people in society who believe that education should be about love of learning? Right? So, is that proportion increasing, decreasing, and at what rate? Right. So. And it's just something that comes to mind to get sort of as a cultural indicator. So I remember when, before I was a parent, I was working with someone whose child had just begun kindergarten, and this colleague of mine had gone to the back-to-school night, and one of the things the kindergarten teacher had done for the assembled parents was to ask them, well, what are you hoping your child will get from being in kindergarten? And the modal answer was discipline. So, there's other things you can point to.
For example, in the early Clinton administration, when Robert Reich was Secretary of, what was he, for Labor?
No, he wanted to be Labor.
I think he was Labor.
He was Labor. He wanted to be Commerce,
And there was a big push to, which again is part of the European system, where working in a company and going to school at the same time. So you work 3 days in a company and go to school 2 days a week. That was seen as something desirable. As the Republicans gained the majority in '94, sort of this ideas disappeared rather quickly.